Hello everyone, here psst.one. Today another interview. We go back in February at TouchDesigner Summit 2018 with Elburz Sorkhabi. He is the head of nVoid division, a multidisciplinary studio based in Toronto, and also is the technical director for 0110. This interview will not be focused on his proper works, but a part of his life where he teach TouchDesigner from one side and how to do and how to grow your own business in this field. But you will see all this stuff, so enjoy! In this meeting you present a talk about TouchDesigner in business. What do you talk about it?
Because it's the hardest lessons I've ever had to learn have all been about business and real life. TouchDesigner stuff, especially the art and technology, there's always somewhere that you can read, there's something online, somebody else is talking about it. But I find that no one is ever really talking about the realities of how do I make a living doing TouchDesigner work, how do I stay out of trouble, how do I get paid, who do I work with, who do I work for, should I start a company? I mean, these are all things that I've had to go through personally and just learn through experience, through trial and error, and I really like to share that kind of knowledge and my experience back to people who are young and just getting in the field because there's so many of them. So it's really, a lot of great people helped me on my journey, and I really want to just pass that on to the next generation. And it's really interesting because I do a lot of writing and educational stuff, and we got a blog, and every time I'm trying to think of what am I going to write about, like what's the next week post going to be about, or what should I teach at a workshop, I always just try and I look at what everyone else is doing and I say, okay, well, what's really helpful that no one else is talking about? Because there's no reason for me to spend time teaching something that's already being taught when I could try and bring something unique that people might not have experienced or have a lot of exposure to.
In fact, with the M division, you don't show only your work, but you do also tutorial. Why it's important, in your opinion, to do tutorial online?
There's a couple of different reasons why it's important. There's reasons why it's important to me personally, there's reasons why it's important to us as a company, and then there's kind of a middle ground. So the first reason is I was very lucky, and I think if I hadn't been lucky, I wouldn't be where I am today. I've met a lot of really generous people, especially derivative themselves, who taught me all the things that I know. I mean, I didn't sit down and magically learn all this stuff. I mean, I went to music school, and then I dropped out, and then I didn't have anything, so I was trying to learn what I thought was interesting and picking up pieces of information here and there. And, when I started learning TouchDesigner, it was really difficult. There weren't any books or tutorials. It was very much, the Wild West, and everyone was trying to find their own way. And I thought to myself, after I started getting more projects and work, it only felt right to me to then give back a lot of that knowledge that I had gained and had to work so hard to get a little piece of knowledge from here, combine it with a little piece of knowledge from this other side, and that's how I work in TouchDesigner. How can we make this easier? On a business level, it's important to me because the more people there are representing TouchDesigner professionally and at a very high level, there's going to be more exposure, more projects. It's that expression that the rising tide lifts all boats. So, we could keep everything secret and I'd be the only one working at TouchDesigner, but then every time I approach a client, they'd be like, they'd ask, what's TouchDesigner? Why would I want to use that? Why I should just use Unity instead, or something else that's very popular. So by kind of releasing all this knowledge and material we have, it benefits us as well, because then there's more exposure, there's so many projects, so many people come to us and say, hey, we saw this TouchDesigner installation here, how can we work together? And so it's really been beneficial on both sides. I mean, it's very much both an economical thing that we do. We're trying to always write and educate people, and also, for me, it's a very personal thing as well.
In your tutorial section, your personal website, you don't talk only about TouchDesigner, but also about how to promote and how to create your business. It's the same reason for the tutorials, I guess, or is there a different reason?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, when I look at things, I have to split myself in two, and I have to have one side of me that zooms in all the way down to the bottom, because that's the only way I can understand, because I didn't have, the experience of going to school for computer science. I don't really understand computers unless I make myself go to that level and try and understand them. And then the other side of it from a high level is that I think these things like the TouchDesigner community, the TouchDesigner industry, our business as well, only grow and work as a whole. So, when we're talking about our website and all the different things we have on it, and why education is important, and why business is important, and why teaching is important, why, why I fly all over the world to do projects, it's all that same bubble to me of one without the other. To me wouldn't work. It would feel unnatural to me. If I didn't teach at all, it would be very strange. It's very similar when I don't play music for a long time. It feels like something's missing, right? And teaching is very similar in a weird way, where if I'm not sharing my knowledge, it almost feels like the last step of teaching myself is missing, because I learn a lot from teaching. So it's that kind of approach, with everything we do, our business, our work. When I'm learning things for myself, it's very much a whole picture. That the whole picture is important to me, but also balanced with that split of, just going as deep as possible into one small little area. And I think that shows in our teaching. I mean, when I teach, I feel like I can really relate specifically to the beginner, because I'm always at that step. I've never left behind being a beginner. Every time I'm trying to learn something new, I always remember, like, oh, this is what it feels like to not know anything. So when I'm teaching, I keep, that's always in my mind, like, how do I take these really complex topics? I mean, it's almost like building a house really quickly. You can't just build a house on sand. You gotta set the foundation, put the concrete in, put the framing around that, put the walls in. You can't just start talking about complex things like particle systems or shaders. I mean, you really gotta start with what's a variable, what does this button do, and what does that button do, and why are we here, and kind of. So it's very holistic for me in that sense.
You work also for 011. Can you talk me about it?
0110 is kind of a collective of different companies, and what happened was nVoid exists, and then we started making more friends in Toronto, where we're based, and each one of our friends had a different company, and we're all doing these different kind of creative endeavors. So we thought, very much the same way we're talking about this whole picture, what would be better than to kind of all bring ourselves together around an idea, around a concept. And 0110 is that concept where it really focuses on telling stories and not really wondering, at some point you got to wonder how we're going to tell the story, but it's really about, what's the essence of story. We've got partners who do mixed martial arts and film transfer and cinematography and, audio post and video post and audio composition. So there's all these different elements of it, and it's almost like if you were an ant on a piece of Lego, you would never know you were on a piece of Lego because it would look so ginormous. But then you see another ant on another piece of Lego, and you're like, oh, we're all just Lego, so why don't we kind of bring these Lego together and build something together? And that's really what 0110 is. I mean, there's obviously business elements behind it, but what brings us together is that we all like each other, we're all friends, we like working together, and it's a philosophy that we all want to tell these really compelling stories, and how we tell them doesn't really matter. We just find the best way to tell them. Like, how can we really talk from one person to another? Is it over an installation? Is it over a piece of music? Is it over a piece of video? Is it an event? Is it a combination of an event that we take a video of and then put it in an installation and then put it online? How can we take a story, tell it, and spread it so that people are experiencing it as well?
how did you develop your business?
It really depends on kind of where you come from, where you're going, and what you're hoping for, I think. You know, I had just come out of music school. There was a part of me that was not complete, and you know, anyone who's having a good time is not gonna all of a sudden leave school. You know, I was not really feeling like this was my place. You know, I was trying to do different things, and as much as I love classical music, it's not really a place. You know, there's a good joke. It's if you go to the symphony, it's young people playing dead people's music for old people, and it's funny, but I think at a certain psychological level, you have to be okay with that to have a happy life in classical music. And if you're okay with that, and you know you love Mozart and you love Beethoven, and as much as I do, I can't play that every week, every other week. Even if I play that every year, I'm going to get tired of it. And that really started to cause a friction between myself and my environment in kind of a classical music school. And so I left, and you know, there's a whole desperation. What am I going to do? You know, I'm young, but I got to make money. I got to pay rent. I got to figure out what I'm going to do with my life. Big thing I always say is just to be open, you know, have an open heart and an open mind to everything that's around you, because I find there's so much, and that's why, you know, our business grew really quickly. There's opportunities everywhere, and I think people just aren't seeing or listening openly enough to see them. They're everywhere. Everywhere you look is an opportunity. And it's always interesting talking to people about their businesses and kind of what their struggle is, and you know what their questions are about it, because it's like you're saying, it's there's a mindset about business, and everyone is trying to force, you know, their round peg in a square hole to try and make it work. And I think it's much more fluid than that. It's anything you want it to be and everything you want it to be. And I think for me personally, nVoid really worked because, you know, I was just in transition, leaving behind one life, but I didn't want to lose all of it. You know, I wanted to figure out something that would work in arts. And you know, the transition was very interesting, because I went from playing trombone classically full-time, then I started playing more hip-hop and commercial music, then I started meeting with DJs, and I started getting involved in electronic music, and then we'd be working on electronic music stuff, and then I learned Max MSP because I was like, oh, maybe I can make some fun tools. And it's just, you know, one thing leads to, and then, you know, I saw a couple of shows at MuteTech in 2012, I think, when Richie Houghton came back for Plastic Man and the first Amon Tobin show. And as a young person who just left music and you see these two things, you're like, wow, this is like a whole new world. This is like the craziest thing I've ever seen. This is really awesome. I want to be a part of it. It never occurred to me that I needed to be a businessman. It was just, you know, here I am now. If I want to take a step forward, what I need to learn and do, and then step, and then, okay, so now what and a lot of people ask me, like, what's your 5-year plan? I have like no, I mean, at the moment, I didn't really before, and I still don't, and maybe that's a bad thing, but that's what keeps me open to being able to go in any direction. Like anything I see, I can go after. Any opportunity I find, we can zoom in on it and try and get it. It's, I mean, that's always been my kind of approach to things, and I think that's really worked in business because it's allowed us to be flexible, find really, because, you know, it's interesting, nVoid is, I think, a very unique company in the field, not just because it's mine, but because we add, you know, our whole business model is around not making art ourselves. You know, everyone else in the industry, you know, you hire somebody to make an art piece. Yes. And all of our kind of, you know, if you're reading our business website, all of it's about somebody else's art. You know, we really just want to help somebody else make art. And I think that's an interesting concept because it really means that we're technical people. Even though we're in this arts field, we are very much high-level technical executioners of your will.
When you change something in the initial idea, you do an artistic change, you do an artistic act, no?
Everything we do has to have that insight of art in it. Because if we didn't, we'd just be programmers. And programmers are useless to us because they don't understand graphics. And it's very interesting when you find these graphics programmers, they're very different than regular programmers, and they're very different than artists. They're kind of like this different breed of people. But I think that's an important, you know, it was very much interesting because that happened because I had just left art school, music school, and I don't know if I was really interested in creating my own art per se. You know, I didn't really sit down. You know, I had a bunch of ideas and I really liked messing around and prototyping, but I didn't want to make giant art pieces, I don't think. And then that's when my openness, I said, okay, well, because I think to a normal person, if you said, okay, well, I want to go in this field, but I don't want to make art pieces, most people would say, well, then you're in the wrong field, because that's the whole field is making art pieces. But then it occurred to me that, well, there's a very huge lack of extremely proficient, I don't know a better word than executioner, but you know, someone who you give your art statement to. You know, a creative director can give us an art statement because all of us have an art background. I understand, I speak the language of art, and then I can go through and, you know, one shot, hammer to nail all the way in. That's really like, that, of all the things we do, you know, we've done big things, small things, really interesting things, some not interesting. But the thing I'm most proud of is how exact we can hit that nail on the head with the hammer. I think that's the most beautiful part of nVoid, is that we do that so consistently, and that's kind of our art, right? I guess, you know, your company has to be a story. You know, it's very much, when somebody goes to your website and reads it and looks at it, to me it's the same as if they open the first chapter of a novel and they read a few pages, and usually you know immediately if you like this novel or if you don't like this novel. And if you like it, you keep reading. And then, you know, for me, a lot of that instant like, there's a connection and a resemblance that you feel to this, and you can relate to this story. And I think that's something that's so missing in a lot of you know, people in our industry who are kind of starting companies and having trouble getting clients, and they're like, we don't know what we're doing. And I think it's because they're not telling the story. That, like, I think when somebody reads that first little bit and they think, oh, technical executioners, there's a bunch of psychological things happening because that person feels safe because they don't think somebody else is going to try and fight them over the art. I think they feel very comfortable because technical relationships between businesses are often a lot easier to manage than creative ones, because creativity is objective, or subjective. Creativity is subjective, and technical stuff is often more objective. You know, you put a list of specs on a sheet of paper. If you did the specs, job complete, everyone's happy. If you didn't do the specs, there's a problem. But how do you do that with art? So, you know, that's our story may seem very, you know, it's only a couple paragraphs, but it's really, we spent a lot of time thinking, like, how are we going to convey this and talk about this and really relate it to people. And I think that's why we've been so successful. And I think, you know, the portfolio on a website is so important because it's not, I think a lot of people think it's a measuring contest. You know, here's how much I've done, here's how much I can do this and this and this, and we're flexible and we have skills. But it's not that, it's a club. Your portfolio is a club, and in the brain of someone looking at it, it's not whether you can or can't do things, it's whether they want to be a part of this club.